Hi, everybody, and thank you for attending today's webinar on legislative advocacy. I'd like to introduce you to Luke George. He's our Senior Government Relations Manager here at the National Safety Council, and he's going to talk about how to work with your local officials to get distracted driving and teen driving introduced into your legislature. Luke, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Amy. And good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from here today. This is going to be a pretty informal discussion, so I encourage you, if you have questions along the way, to feel free to jump in and ask questions. Just to give you an overview of what we'll be discussing today, we'll start off discussing the legislative process and the steps a bill has to go through before it becomes a law. We'll then discuss effective strategies for contacting and influencing your elected officials. Next, we'll discuss two pieces of distracted driving and teen safe driving legislation that's currently pending before the U.S. Congress. And then we'll conclude by discussing state laws and legislation and ways that advocates can be effective at the state level. So just to start off, giving a quick overview of the legislative process, at both the federal and state level, a bill has to pass each chamber, generally a House and a Senate, in identical form and be signed by the President or Governor to become law. And there are several steps in the process for a bill to pass each chamber. And the first step is for a bill to be introduced by a member of that chamber. Once the bill is introduced by a member, it's referred to a legislative committee, which is a committee that's made up of a smaller number of members. Committees can range anywhere from a state legislature from maybe 10 to 20 members to up to 60 or 70 members at the federal level. And then once that bill is referred to the committee, it's up to the committee chairman as to how he or she wants to proceed. Sometimes a bill can be taken up right away and voted on. Other times, a bill never gets consideration in the committee. And then yet other times, a committee may hold a hearing where the public can testify on the bill. The bill can then be marked up where members can offer amendments to strengthen or weaken certain provisions in the bill. If a bill passes out of committee, it needs a majority vote. It then goes to the full chamber to be taken up. And again, once it goes to the full chamber, it's up to the leader of the House or the leader of the Senate to determine when that chamber will take up the bill. And once the bill is on the floor, members can offer amendments again to strengthen or weaken it, and then the full chamber will vote on the bill. And if the bill passes the full chamber, it would need a majority vote. It then goes to the other chamber. So if it passes the House, it would then go to the Senate. And the process would start all over in the Senate, where a bill would be referred to the committee in the Senate. It would get marked up. There could be hearings in the Senate committee. The Senate floor would vote on the bill. And then if the bill is identical in text, it could go to the president or the governor to be signed into law. If different chambers pass different versions of the bill, if the text isn't exactly identical, then the leaders from the two chambers have to get together to compromise and come up with a bill that's identical in language. And once they reach a compromise, that bill that's identical in language would go back to each chamber. They'd vote on that bill, and then it would be sent to the president or governor to either sign into law or to veto. So that's a really high-level overview of the legislative process. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them now. Okay. If not, we'll move on then to talk a little bit about your elected officials. Every American has 2 U.S. senators and has 1 member of the House of Representatives. U.S. senators serve an entire state. A member of the House of Representatives serves a smaller area within a state. The more populated states have more members of Congress than other states. All states have 2 senators, regardless of their size. And it's important to identify who your elected officials are, because these are the legislators that are most accountable to you. You get to decide whether or not to return them to the state capitol or to Washington. They're going to be much more likely to want to meet with you and to be receptive to meeting requests. And you have the most influence with them. There's different ways that you can find out who your members of Congress are. If you want to find out who your U.S. member of Congress in the House of Representatives is, you can go to the U.S. House of Representatives website, which is house.gov. And in the top right corner of that web page, you can type in your zip code. And it will tell you who your member of Congress is. It'll give you a link to their web page, and you can learn more about them. For U.S. senators, it's similar. If you go to the senate.gov web page, you can pick your state, and then it will tell you who your 2 senators are for that state. For your state legislature, it depends on the process a little bit depending on your state. But generally, you can go to that page, you can put in your zip code, and it will tell you who your senator and who your member of the assembly is. A more simple way to do this is you can go to the NSC Constituent Advocacy webpage, which is capwiz.com/NSC, and you can type in your zip code there, and it will give you your elected officials both at the federal and state level. So let's talk a little bit about writing your elected officials. As we discussed earlier, it's important that elected officials hear from their constituents so that they know there's strong support for distracted driving and team-safe driving legislation in their state. And one of the easiest ways to contact your elected officials is through email. All members of the U.S. Congress and U.S. Senators generally have web forms that you can fill out. So you put in your name, your address, and you can type a letter to them through their web page. At the state level, it varies. Some state legislatures have web forms. Others still use traditional email, where if you go to the state legislature web page, you can find their email address and easily send them a message. Another site that you can go to, again, is the NSC Constituent Advocacy web page, where we put up alerts on our web page when there's times to key points in the legislative process to act. We currently have alerts up there on some federal legislation, which we'll talk about later in the presentation, as well as an alert up there for legislation that's moving through the Michigan legislature. Here's just a screenshot where you can see what our constituent advocacy website looks like. Top, you can see you can put in your subject line, you can customize it, and then you can customize the text. But we put pre-populated text in there, so if you don't want to customize your letter, you can just send the text that's in there. And if you see down farther below, it will tell you who your members are. You can click the mouse a few times, and you can send a letter at the federal level to your 2 senators and your 1 member of Congress in less than 3 minutes' time. So it's a really simple site to use. So if you're looking to send a letter quickly and you don't feel comfortable going to state legislature web pages, this is a really easy way where you can send a message to let your elected officials know that you care about distracted driving or you care about team-safe driving legislation. I want to talk a little bit about crafting an effective letter. Elected officials receive a lot of letters, so you want your letter to be less than 1 page long and to the point. All letters should have a specific, measurable ask that's clearly stated in the first paragraph of the letter. So, for example, a good ask would be to ask a member of Congress to co-sponsor a specific piece of legislation or vote against a specific amendment. A bad ask would be something that would say, please combat distracted driving. If you're not really giving them an easy way that they can kind of fulfill your request. And you want to make sure in your letter that you include statistics about why team-safe driving or distracted driving legislation is important to you. And we'll talk a little later in this webinar about places you can go to find statistics. And finally, personal stories are really powerful. They really help tell sometimes, especially for team-safe driving, which is a little more complicated to talk about. It really puts a human face to this story and shows how great a problem this issue is, and that lives are at risk when legislatures don't act. So anytime you have a personal story of loss that you've had in your family that you feel comfortable sharing, I'd highly encourage you to include that in any of your correspondence with elected officials. So writing's one really quick, effective way to contact your legislators, but another way is also to call their offices. And again, their phone numbers can be found on their websites. Your phone call to an elected official should be rather short. You'll want to tell the person who answers the phone the reason you're calling, and then provide them with your contact information. And that staff person will take your message down, they'll relate it to the elected official. Oftentimes they'll either call you back or they'll write you a letter telling you, their views on the issue that you called them about. But again, it's important even on that phone call to give your personal story and discuss why the bill or the legislation that you're asking them to take action on is important to you. Another way to interact with members of Congress is through their staff, and especially at the federal level, this is probably the first point of contact that you're going to have with a member of Congress. And this is really a great way. Staff do all the heavy lifting for legislation. So speaking with them and talking to them is really effective because they're the ones that are generally crafting the legislation, offering amendments. So they're an important contact in the process to make sure you build a relationship with. So to schedule a meeting with D.C. staff, you can call the member's Washington, D.C. office and tell them that you want to speak to the legislative assistant or the staffer who handles transportation issues. If you want to schedule a meeting with district staff, you can call that member's district or local office and explain what you want to discuss and ask if you can set up a meeting with staff in their district. Oftentimes, setting up a meeting in the district is a lot easier, especially at the federal level. So if you live in Chicago, you can meet with their staff in Chicago as opposed to having to fly out to Washington, D.C. to meet their staffer in their Capitol Hill office. The one thing that I'd really stress before you meet with staff is do your homework. Try to go to their website, try to learn a little bit about that member of Congress. For example, do they have children? Do they have children who are, around 16, 17 years of age who are learning to drive? Have they been supportive of other transportation safety legislation in the past? If so, you can talk to them about how this would be a continuation of their support for transportation safety legislation, and it would fit really well into their general viewpoint. If they tend to have more of a law and order focus, you may want to frame the issue more as a law and order subject and how it's a matter of public safety. When you meet with staff cover a large array of legislative issues, so they may not be familiar with the issue distracted driving or teen safe driving legislation. And that's okay because your purpose is to come in and educate them on the issue and bring them up to speed and tell them why you think a specific bill is important. So again, in your meeting, you want to be concise and clear. You want to have a specific ask of the member again, co-sponsoring a specific bill or introducing a specific piece of legislation. And you want to serve as a resource to them. So feel free to offer them any information. And if they have questions, feel free to tell them that you'll be able to get them the information. If you can't answer a question, you can turn to us here at the National Safety Council, and we'd be happy to help you find the answer that you're looking for. At the end of the meeting, you also want to get the staffer's business card. If you have a business card of your own, you may want to leave that with the staffer as well. In a few days' time, follow up with them. Send them an email, thank them for meeting with you, and then once again, make your ask of that staffer. Tell them, it was really great to meet with you, and I would love if Congressman Smith would co-sponsor this teen safe driving bill. Another way that you can meet with elected officials at town hall meetings. And the benefit to attending town hall meetings is that you generally can have interaction with the member of Congress. So members hold town hall meetings in different towns in their district, and allows them to get up and speak about what they're doing in Congress or what they're doing in the state legislature, and then it allows them to take questions from their constituents. Notices for these meetings are generally included in local newspapers. They're on the member's website, and oftentimes they'll send out notices via their e-newsletter or social media sites. So if you can sign up for their email updates on their webpage, it's a great way to be able to find out when they're holding these meetings. Again, you want to be prepared at the town hall meeting, so if you get a chance to ask a question, you're going to want to have a really short, concise statement that you want to give on distracted driving or teen safe driving, and then have a clear ask at the end of your statement. You're also going to want to bring some handouts or one-page documents with you that you can leave behind for the member of Congress's staffer afterwards. So it's kind of a refresher. So it provides them with facts and statistics and has your specific ask in that packet that you leave with the staffer. Another way to be impactful with elected officials is to write a letter to an editor. And letters to the editors vary from newspaper to newspaper. They all have different requirements on word count, but they're generally very short. So you want to be concise again in what you're asking. And when possible, it's helpful to respectfully include the legislator's name in your letter to the editor and to encourage him or her to take a specific action. For example, you can include a line in your letter that states, "This issue is of great importance to our community, and I hope that Congressman Smith will co-sponsor the legislation." And it's important to include their name because most members of Congress receive a daily clipping packet, and any clips that include their name are put at the top of the clips. This is a way to get an issue in front of that elected official without having to have a one-on-one meeting with them. Another kind of growing way of advocating is via social media. And I find this is really helpful more to say thank you to elected officials who are supporting a bill that you're supporting. So you can write, for example, on their Facebook wall, "Thank you, Congressman Smith, for co-sponsoring the Stand Up Act." As a result of your action, more lives can be saved. So it allows his constituents or her constituents to be able to see that they're taking action and they have support from people who have lost loved ones as a result of a traffic crash. You can also tweet your legislators, asking them to support an issue or bill, or thanking them for their support. And we've seen, some of the thank you tweets that some of our members have done have been retweeted by the elected official. So it helps promote what they're doing on Capitol Hill or in the state legislature. So before we move on, I just want to stop and see if anyone has any questions thus far. Okay, great. So thus far, we've talked about the legislative process and how to contact your elected officials. So let's now turn to the status of distracted driving and teen safe driving at the state level. The National Safety Council has been working both at the state and federal level on teen safe driving and distracted driving issues. And one of our federal teen driving safety priorities is the Stand Up Act, which stands for the Safe Teen and Novice Driver Uniform Protection Act. And the Stand Up Act is a bipartisan legislation. It's been introduced in the House by Congressman Tim Bishop, who's a Democrat from New York, and Congressman Randy Hultgren, who's a Republican from Illinois. And it's been introduced in the Senate by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who's a Democrat from New York. And what the legislation would do is it would provide incentives to states that adopt best practice GDL laws, which are graduated driver's licensing laws, which gradually introduce teens to driving in a safer environment and in a less risky situation. And while all states have some form of GDL laws, few states have what we'd call best practice GDL laws. And the pace of adoption of GDL laws at the state level has been very slow. So what this legislation does is it provides incentive grant funding to states to help them encourage to pass these laws quicker. So for the first 3 years, the legislation would provide incentive grants, and then the final 3 years of a 6-year bill, the legislation would hold a small portion of the federal highway funding if they don't enact the best practice GDL provisions. And the provisions included in the legislation include a 3-stage licensing process. It includes a prohibition on nighttime driving during the learner's permit when they're learning to drive in the intermediate stage when they first get their license. It includes a passenger restriction during the learner's permit and intermediate stages. It includes a prohibition on the use of cell phones and other electronic devices during the learner's permit and intermediate stages. And it sets age 16 as the minimum age at which a driver can get a learner's permit, and age 18 is the minimum age at which all the restrictions of an intermediate license are removed. And the legislation also requires that a 6-month holding period for a learner's permit. So a driver would have to have their learner's permit and practice driving for at least 6 months before they could get their intermediate license. And while we're working to get the Stand Up Act legislation passed as a standalone bill, we realize that most traffic safety legislation generally passes as part of a surface transportation reauthorization bill, which is a bill that Congress takes up every 5 to 6 years that reauthorizes all of the federal transportation programs. And this is, again, where most of the safety provisions are included. So we're trying to get the Stand Up Act provisions included into the reauthorization bill. And the Senate passed their reauthorization bill last month. And it includes a $22 million GDL incentive grant program. And it includes all the provisions of the Stand Up Act except for the minimum age 16 entry age, and it doesn't include the sanction provisions or the withholding of federal funds. But all the other provisions that were on that last slide for the Stand Up Act are included in the legislation. And it also includes a $39 million distracted driving incentive grant program for states to encourage states to enact texting bans for all drivers and cell phone bans for teen drivers. As I noted, this bill passed the Senate last month in March. The legislation passed the Senate. It's now moving to the House. The House has Transportation and Infrastructure Committee report out a bill that includes some of the GDL provisions of the Stand Up Act. As you can see here on the screen, it has a requirement for at least 30 hours of supervised driving practice during the learner's permit, has a 6-month holding period for both the learner's permit and intermediate license stage, has a prohibition on unsupervised driving between midnight and 4 a.m., it has a passenger restriction during the intermediate stage of no more than one passenger. At this point, it's not clear what the House is going to do next. It does not appear that there are enough votes in the full House for the House to take up and pass this bill. There's talk they may take up a smaller 18-month bill. There's talk they may take up the Senate bill, which again passed the Senate last month, or they may pass a long-term extension of the current reauthorization legislation. But again, if you want to go to the NSC Constituent Advocacy website, there are letters there that you can send to your member of the House of Representatives to encourage them to support strong GDL provisions and distracted driving provisions in the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. Moving on to the state level, I put up here some links to where you can find out what the laws are in your state. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety has a really nice summary table of state GDL laws. They also have a summary table of distracted driving laws. As well as there's a coalition called the Safe Roads for Teens Coalition, which has state-specific fact sheets, which will tell you what actions your state would need to take to become in compliance with the Stand-Up Act, which we just talked about. So these are all really great websites to visit and familiarize yourself with the legislation in your particular state. I just want to move on to talk a little bit about legislation that's pending in different states. And I just put up here legislation that we think has a likelihood of possibly moving during this session. So in Alabama, Alaska, Ohio, and South Carolina, there's legislation that's currently moving that would ban texting while driving for all drivers. In Alaska, Arizona, Michigan, and New York, there's legislation that's pending that would ban all cell phone use by teen drivers, or at least drivers that are holding a learner's permit or in the intermediate stage where they are just beginning their independent driving. And then New Jersey is really the only state that has legislation that's pending that would revamp their GDL or improve their graduated driver's license system in the state. And I'd be happy to talk later in the webinar if anyone on this webinar is from any of those states, they want to talk specifically about the legislation in those states. So let's move on and talk about ways that you can identify state legislation in your state. If you're interested in tracking legislation, most states on their state legislature website have an area where you can track bills, where you can put in keyword searches and try to find bills that are currently pending before the legislature. So some phrases that we like to use at the council include teen drivers, distracted driving, wireless, texting, teen driver, GDL. If you search for these terms, they'll usually pull up the bills that are currently pending, and you can identify legislation that you may want to get active on and encourage your elected officials to support. Some states also allow you to sign up for bill tracking emails, where you can be informed and emailed anytime a bill is introduced that includes any of your keyword searches. Also, another really great site is the National Conference of State Legislatures has a traffic safety legislation database that's free to the public, where you can search for and view all the traffic safety legislation that's been introduced in your state. It's a really great resource to go to when you're first trying to get a feel for the legislative landscape in your state. And finally, you may want to consider joining a legislative Teen Safe Driving Coalition. While many of these coalitions focus on projects other than advocacy, most coalitions keep each other informed as legislation is introduced and moving through the legislative process. And as you can see here on this slide, the states that are shaded in are the states that currently have Teen Safe Driving Coalitions. And if your state is one of those states, if you're interested in getting involved in the coalition, you can contact Kathy Bernstein here at the council, and her contact information is here on the slide, and she can put you in touch with the coalition leader in that state. Here are the websites for the Teen Safe Driving Coalitions, which the National Safety Council supports. So if you live in one of these states, you may want to consider visiting their website to get a better sense for the work that they're doing in their state. And then just to conclude, here are some additional resources where you can find facts, statistics that you can use in your advocacy materials. So if you're meeting with a member of Congress, all these documents provide really great resources, background information on the issue to help educate yourself before you meet with elected officials. So with that, I will turn it back to Amy, and I think we'll be taking some questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. That was very helpful. I'm going to turn it on to Bonnie Raphael. Bonnie is a member of the Hearts Network and Focus Driven, and has done a great job trying to get legislation passed in her home state of Michigan. and she agreed to share some lessons learned with the group. So, Bonnie, over to you.
Hi, Amy. Thanks. Yeah, it's been a challenge trying to get things moved here in Michigan, but it's actually gone rather quickly. A little history: my daughter Kelsey was killed at 17 in an automobile accident here in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and it was determined she was talking on her cell phone when she went out to pass a car, misjudging the distance of an oncoming car. So a year after she had passed away, I decided that something needed to be done after I did some heavy research on car crashes with young adults and cell phone use. I spoke to my representative, senator here in Michigan, back in October of last year, and he didn't seem too keen on doing it, but he told me to email him anyway, so I did, and then it started to go from there. He introduced the law, our bill, that's the bill SB 756, and it went through the Senate rather quickly. I went to an Energy and Technology Committee where I testified, and they made some changes on the bill. The bill right now is a bill for Level 1 and Level 2 drivers, primary offense for use of a cell phone while they're driving. It was voted out of the Senate, passed there, and is now in the House. I have to agree with Luke. You really do have to educate your legislators. They really don't know because they have so much other stuff going on. They don't know. When I went to testify, I presented a slideshow. I only had it for about 10 minutes, but I also had another handout that had all the statistics that I wanted them to know, which they really didn't know. So you know, it's like Luke said, it's very useful to educate them. That's what you have to do, and having handouts is great. Another thing that I did is I did a massive email campaign. I think I've sent out over 800 emails to people and legislators. As soon as I found out what committee the bill was in, I emailed every person on that committee. If I found out that, you know, a representative or a senator wasn't in favor, I emailed that senator or that representative to plead to them my case. I also used the media, a lot of media attention on them. My senator said that it's the most media that he's ever had on any bill since he's been in the Senate, and he's been there a couple terms now. So, but people can do it. One voice makes a difference. We think it's going to pass the House. We do have some struggles in the House, but we're pretty sure we can get it passed there and then signed into law, which they have now named it Kelsey's Law. So it's a tough battle, but it can be done. Amy?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Bonnie. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, that concludes today's webinar. If you think of any questions that you'd like to shoot over, you can send those to hearts@nsc.org, and we will get them over to Luke or Bonnie and get responses back to you. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.